A lot of communication research on media tends to focus on the perspective of the producers of a media message. And as a result, they tend to look at the questions related to how media and media messages affect an audience. But what if we were to look at media a little differently? What if we were to look at media not as the actor, but as the acted upon? So instead of looking at what media messages do to us, we're looking at what we do with media. That is where today's theory, uses and gratifications theory, enters the conversation about contemporary communication. Most research before uses and gratifications, you might hear me say uses and grats as an abbreviation. I've heard that one thrown around over the years. Most work before uses and grats took the role of the producer of the message, the communicator. Uh, so we had lots of research looking at what we called media effects. We wanted research to tell us about the impact of a particular show or a particular campaign. And as a result, we were looking at the audience as a target, not as an active agent in the process. So we're looking at media effects, but we'd never really taken into consideration why the audience is using the media that it uses. So in comes uses and gratifications theory to shift the center of the conversation so that instead of asking, what do media do to people, we're now asking, what do people do with media? Uses and gratifications suggest that we use media to fulfill a certain set of needs. And the theory attempts to describe and explain what those needs are and how media can fulfill those needs. That different view of our relationship to media also has some impact on our views, our prior research views on the relationship between the messages we consume and how they might impact us. Because now, as opposed to those older approaches that assumed that the audience was just a passive entity that sat there and took in these messages and then acted differently as a result, now we're looking at the audience as an active group who actively selects the media they choose to consume. They have options, they have activities, they have content that they can choose from. And now this theory is even more, I think, even more prescient than ever before because now we have more media options out there than ever before. In the early stages of uses and gratifications, cable television was just starting to emerge. So if you imagine the early days of network television, and I know some of you can't do that, but once upon a time we had 3 or 4 channels. If you were lucky to have a public TV channel, you might have a fourth. And this was before Fox became a major network. So you had very few options out there to choose from. Now we have more options than ever before. And we have uses and gratifications, which works from assumptions that the audience is an active participant who chooses media in the pursuit of certain goals. And we'll talk about those goals in a little more detail. But what that means is that the initiative lies with us, not solely with the producers of a message. This means also that media have to compete with other entities for our attention. You know, I could sit and veg when I get home from work today. I could sit and veg in front of a television and watch an episode of, I don't know, heck, I could get onto YouTube, not YouTube, I could get onto Netflix and watch another episode of Justice League or Justice League Unlimited for who knows how manyth time. But I could do other things. I could bury myself in a good book for a little while. Heck, I could spend time with my family. I could do all sorts of things. I could work on writing my own work, my own research, my own book. Media has to compete with other things to get our attention. And, well, we need to talk about why we choose the media we choose. Now, here we go. Uses and gratifications theory suggests that we choose the media we use because it meets one or more of a set of needs. For starters, of course, there's information. There are people who seek media to gather information. There are people who go on YouTube. There are people who go on YouTube to learn how to do things. There are people who go on to Google to ask questions in search of answers. There are people who watch television shows, people who watch fix-it shows to learn how to do things around their house. There are people who watch the news because they perceive that it gives them a sense of a type of information, a sense of what the world around them is like. We also use media, of course, for entertainment, for diversion. Sometimes you just want to veg out and watch. Sometimes I just want to watch John Wick fight people. um, or insert the entertainer of your choice. Sometimes I want to listen to mindless pop music. Sometimes I want to watch a silly TV show, what have you, because I find those things entertaining. But that's a choice I make, watching something for entertainment versus watching it for information. And those aren't the only reasons. We also consume media in pursuit of personal identity goals. We pursue media in part because the media we choose tell us something about who we are. At the end of each day, when my wife and I are home from work, the first TV show we watch, and many nights the only TV show we watch, is Jeopardy. And I can't help but consider the possibility that on some level, our identity as whether you want to call us nerds or academics or intellectuals, um, that identity is confirmed by the fact that we choose to watch a show like Jeopardy as opposed to some reality show, what have you. So we have the needs for entertainment, the need for information, the need for personal identity, and there's also a need for social interaction. Sometimes we choose shows because they impact our personal relationships. There are shows that my wife and I might watch because they elicit conversation between the two of us. There are shows that you might watch because you have friends who watch those shows and you want to be a part of the conversations they have about them. Those are uses and gratifications for using media. Again, entertainment. We're trying to escape from our problems. We want to relax. We want to fill time. We want to have an emotional release. But we also have the need for information. We want to find out about relevant events going on around us. We want to satisfy our curiosity and our general interest because we find a sense of security that comes through that knowledge. Now, the personal identity goal, we are finding a reinforcement for our personal values. We see models of behavior that we view positively. It's nice to see smart people on Jeopardy. And we gain an insight into who we are and what we value. Then lastly, that social interaction goal. We develop a sense of belonging, of identifying with somebody else. Whether it's the people who are going to be talking about the episode of your favorite TV show at the water cooler at the office the next day, or whether you're gaining a sense of identifying with a character you like, whether you see a little bit of yourself in the protagonist of a show. That's still an opportunity for a kind of social interaction that we actually refer to as parasocial interaction. It's not entirely real. I mean, we're identifying with a character who's a fictitious one. Sometimes these can be substitutes for real life companionship. And while you might mock that idea, there's also a theory called the media equation theory that suggests that humans tend to treat media as they would another person. Think about people who come home and immediately turn on the TV, but may not necessarily sit and watch something, but they turn it on to have some noise in the room. There's some interaction going on there. And a media equation theorist might say that we're uncomfortable with that silence, that we need some quasi interaction with each other. All of those different needs fall into multiple categories. There are cognitive needs, there are affective needs, emotional needs, there are personal needs, including the need for credibility, for stability, for status. That's why we might find ourselves avoiding some shows that we may regard as not cool enough for us, or not smart enough for us, or otherwise beneath us. Now, there is uses and gratifications theory in a nutshell. It has its strengths and it has its shortcomings. No theory is perfect, so there's no surprise there. One of the challenges of the theory is that it tends to do a good job of describing, of answering the why question, but it doesn't really address the how nearly as much. We rely on self-report data, so we are forced to trust that people are telling us the truth about what it is they're watching and how often they're watching it. And so we're not sure about the presence of, say, guilty pleasure television, if people are too guilty to admit that they're watching it. And the idea of media consumption as functionalist can be a little problematic. If we insist that we're always going to find some gratification from using media, we might stop being critical about the media messages we choose to take in. Um, there might be people who are meeting needs by seeking out media that include problematic information, and we don't want to turn a blind eye to that. We want to be aware of the potential impact of those messages on people. So while the theory does switch the emphasis from the producers of the message to the consumers as active parties, we also want to keep in mind that there is the possibility that producers are giving us bad or problematic information for our consumption, whether it's for entertainment, information, or what have you. I mean, there is news out there that is more accurate than some other news that's out there. And critics of the theory suggest that we can't overlook that. So there you have it. Uses and gratifications theory is one of the more commonly cited media theories these days, and it's one that has impact. It's one that has implications not only for people who study media and communication, but for people who study relationships, because the messages that people receive in those media messages, the information they receive in those messages, can be useful or counterproductive to the relationships that we engage in.